Okay, welcome to Suspension 101. I have a track here which has a lot of chunky stuff and also some other features, and let's go through which part is of the suspension and the features is meant for what kind of part of the trail. Let's go through the suspension and how it works. So there are a few things that you need to know first. One is leverage ratio. That means that the leverage ratio, how much the rear axle moves in compared to the shock. So for example, if we have a 3:1 leverage ratio, it means that the rear axle moves vertically 3 millimeters and the shock moves 1 millimeter. And if we have 2:1, so that means when the rear end moves 2 millimeters, the shock moves 1 millimeter. And what that means is that 3:1 has lower shaft speed. That means that here's a piston that moves and goes through oil. So 3:1, it means that it moves slower than 2:1. And this is how we control the damping also within the shock. And the progressivity on leverage ratio means that the leverage ratio goes lower, which means that the shaft speed increases through the travel. At the end of the travel, which means here, this part, it means that it's faster, which means more damping. Also, what it means that the spring rate, the spring rate is the same, but it means that it's harder to push the spring as well at the end of the stroke, which means at this point. It's easier to move at this point. What that means is that in the beginning of the stroke, the suspension is more easier to compress than in the last part. So the spring rate and the damping, they're both part of the suspension, but they are quite separate. It depends about the shaft speed. The spring is not dynamic, so it doesn't react to the speed. Although in air, there's a slight possibility that the air can't react to fast speeds as coil would, but let's not think about that because that's pretty much theoretical. So the spring rate helps you on low speed bumps more than the damping, because damping can't necessarily damp really slow impacts. Also, the spring rate will carry the load, which means the bike and you, so it doesn't go all the way. If you remove the air from your shock or the coil spring, the damping won't help you to keep up in the travel. So when people talk about I need more support in the mid-stroke, that is wrong. You can't get more support in mid-stroke from damping. Although you can change the mid-stroke support with leverage ratio, which means that we change the leverage ratio on the mid-range of the suspension, but you can't change that by yourself without changing the linkages and probably some other kinematic parts of the bike. So you need to focus on the spring rate and damping. And the spring rate you can make more progressive with tokens, but that changes the mid-stroke as well, but that's another story. So let's go through the two different damping scenarios. Here we have a low frequency bump. So what it means, it's high shaft speed bump as well. So low frequency means that the frequency, like in sound, when it's high pitched, low, it means that the frequency is lower. So this kind of bump means that the wavelength of the impact is bigger, so you can't really hit these with a certain amount of speed very fast. So this uses a lot of travel from your shock, and also it usually means that the shaft moves with high speed. So that's why you have in some shocks you have high speed compression. It means that when you hit something like this, or in a drop, or very squared edge hit, like some of the rocks down here. And that usually means that the fastest shaft speed is in the beginning of the stroke. And here we come to the leverage ratio again. So it's not ideal that we have low leverage ratio on the beginning of the stroke, because then you wouldn't be able to use the suspension to absorb this hit. So we need the first part of the hit to be more compliant with the high shaft speed. So that's why also we have the ending stroke with less leverage ratio, so that we can increase the shaft speed, because the speed of the shaft is not so fast in the ending stroke, because you have already absorbed a lot of the hits. And so this is what it means to have a low frequency bump or high speed bump. Here we have high frequency bumps. So what it means that these bumps are fairly small. You enter these with high speed, and you could be also running these on high speed, high shaft speed area. But with progressive leverage ratio, these, when you hit these, they are not on a high speed leverage ratio area, because you're not using enough of the suspension. And the speed roughly doesn't get, the shaft speed doesn't get in that point that this would be absorbed with high speed valving. The point with these, that we don't need to damp these, is that your mass wants to float through these, and your suspension needs to be floating as well, like this, like a basketball. You don't want to damp every single one of these rocks, because that slows you down. Damping slows you down. So what we want our shock to do in here is to just track the ground as effectively as possible. So the rebound is more important here than the damping itself. Rebound is damping as well, but compression damping. So rebound damping, and we need low amount of rebound damping in here. On the high speed impact, we need more rebound damping from the ending stroke. I forgot to tell that before, but from when your shock compresses all the way here, we don't want it to fast go back again, because that will knock you off from your pedals and gives you a passenger feeling on your bike. But here we want the rebound to work really fast, so it tracks the ground, and then you don't lose that much energy when you're floating through this type of terrain. So when you come over there, you have a lot of speed, you need to just go through all these rocks and roots and be as fast as possible. So one part of the suspension is the tires. So and the tires are one of the most important part of damping that you can get, and the easiest way to change your damping. So I have enduro tires here, and they are ideal for rolling. So they roll good, they have some damping, but they're not ideal as downhill tires for damping. And I mean this kind of damping. So all these small roots here, they are something that you can't really damp with your suspension. Your suspension hardly moves on this kind of stuff, but your tires, they move. Here we have a complex situation. So basically, first we hit a low frequency bump, which is kind of a jump-ish, and then we land on a square edge hit over here. So basically that's a high speed, low frequency bump as well. But after that we have a lot of high frequency stuff. So when we land somewhere here, then we need to cope with all these rocks after the bump, and then before the corner is there. So we have a lot of speed entering to that corner, even though it has a lot of grip and it's not very tight. It's but nevertheless, there's a tree and a rock. You need to make a pretty sharp turn in this kind of speed that you enter it. And how suspension helps you here is that when you go over that gap and land on a square edge hit, your rebound needs to be set. So that's something that you can't really change with all the dials here. That is internally. So the shim stack has a rebound setting that will help you on this, because you use most of the travel entering this, and the high-speed rebound kind of stalls the shock a little bit, so you can gather yourself and brace for the next impacts and then to the corner. So this is more tricky situation that it appears to be, and the suspension kinematics and the suspension damping characteristics play a big role over here, and here is where you determine the speed that you will have on the next straight. So how you can get faster on this kind of tracks is that you need to corner that better, so you can accelerate faster to the next straight, where the actual time has been made, that will be made. So when you can corner that better, and if your exit speed is greater, the less time you will be spending on the next straight. So that is how the competitions are won, and that's how you also can make your riding more fun. So I enjoy this kind of riding because the faster I can do this, the smoother it gets. So the slower I come to this place, the harder for me it is to clear actually. I'll show you how it looks like if I go slower here. Okay, here we have something where we need low speed compression damping, and also a good leverage ratio that the bike will hold up its geometry. By holding up geometry, I mean that when you go into the corner, it's ideal that the both ends of the bike are compressed in the same way. It might be different in different bikes, but with our bike we have designed it so that the bike needs to have the same geometry throughout the corner to be able to cope with what's coming next. And also we want the bike to have the same geometry so that the rider doesn't need to push himself to weird positions on the bike. So you can hold up your weight on the center of the bike, you can concentrate on the turning and then pedaling afterwards. So obviously the fork and the rear suspension have different characteristics. The difference between the fork and the rear suspension is that the rear shock is driven by linkages, or at least some kind of leverage, that it doesn't have the 1-to-1 leverage ratio that the fork has. The modern fork has air spring, which means that it's naturally progressive. So where the air gets compressed, it gets progressive towards the end, where also the air shock does the same. But however, we can change this characteristic as well with the leverage ratio, what comes from the linkages and the leverage from the swing arm. So the idea in this corner is to put the suspension, I'm talking about the rear suspension now, so we need to put the suspension work so that it starts to support your cornering, so it doesn't suck all the energy that you're pushing into the corner. There might be also some rocks in the corner as well, but those scenarios we also talked about earlier, so those are different scenarios. But anyway, in the corner it could be like a pump where you can pump speed, some kind of hump, which is low compression, where you can work the bike through the bump, but it needs to support you so that you can generate speed from this corner and corner with ease. So it means that the low compression is it's low speed. You compress the bike slowly, and we want both ends to work together. that's suspension explained. Maybe not throughout, but at least some part of it. And I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you.